And this is really a quality piece of rock that you can map, because when it rings like that, it rings because there's no impurities in it, and that's kind of what you're looking for. So I should just show you kind of quick. There's two main steps in making points. One is called percussion flaking. And percussion is, if you were in the band in high school, if you were a percussionist, what did you play? Drums, yeah. So percussion is really, hitting stone and breaking off flakes. Remember when Dan was talking about shooting a window with a BB gun? If you ever looked at what resulted from that BB hitting the window, you get a cone. So you've got the two, if I take a cross section of the window, this is it, and you've got a cone. And what you try to do is you try to figure out where the edge of that cone is, and you line up the rock and you whack it, and you're trying to get that part of that cone, the conchoidal fractures. We looked at the obsidian that had the kind of ripple marks in it, like when you drop a rock into a pond, it ripples out from the edge. So anyway, what I'll do, these are the tools, and typically the tools are Antler. This is a moose antler, and this is where it connected to the head. This one I found when we were in the Boundary Waters. I actually had bought one, and they were kind of pricey, and I found one in the Boundary Waters. It was floating at a portage, waiting for me to pick it up. So I picked it up, and how the blade of the antler is kind of big. That blade was really, really soft, but this part was hard. So what I did is I took this and put it by our campfire, and I let it dry out, and then I cut the blade part off, because that was pretty much rotty anyway, and it resulted in this really good quality tool. And then this is a white-tailed deer antler. This is from a deer that I got, and he had one side was really nice and this side was really short. And this is a really good tool. This is where it hooks in. We call this the rose. Like this is the bullet tie. Dan gave me a nice bullet tie. This is the hardest part of the antler, and you need something that's hard enough that when you hit the rock, it's going to have enough mass that it's going to break off a flake, but you want it so that the rock actually kind of digs into the bone, so it actually kind of grabs onto the rock and pushes the flake off. I also have tools. This is copper, and you can see that it's kind of beat up on the end because I've used it a lot. But this chunk of copper is the same weight as this, and you can take a look at these later. So larger flakes that you take off with a larger, we call these billets, and smaller flakes you take off with smaller billets, like the white-tailed deer horn or the copper. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do, whenever I do this, I kind of almost have to warm up to really, get in the swing of it, so to speak. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break off some chunks. This is knife river flint, and I'm going to kind of try to thin this out a bit. And you'll see on the edge, this edge is kind of thick. And so when you make a point, you want to make something that's thin, and you want it thin at the edges. This is a preform that I found, and you can see that they actually had started to work on this. This was one big chip, and for some reason they left it. Okay, and you can see the flaking that was taken off on this side of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get this piece of rock thinner. What's probably going to happen is I'm probably going to break it, because I think there's a fracture right in here. But this is a good one to warm up on. So think I'll do that.
Do you usually do that outside because of the dust?
You know, outside is good because, yeah, there is a lot of dust that forms from doing this. And silicosis is, you know, definitely a concern because you're not only hammering on this, you're also grinding on these. And I'll show you the grinding process here in a second too. So I'm going to put on some safety glasses. And you want to protect yourself when you're doing this. So I've got some leather here. And leather is good. Oh, some of the other tools that were used for doing this are hammers, you know, rocks that you just hold in your hand and whack it to. So you can, I mean, you can find big chunks of material that you want to make points out of, and the bigger the chunks are, the bigger the billet that you need to do it. So this probably was not used for breaking off big flakes, but you know, a rock similar to this, and actually even bigger rocks than this. I think that some rocks probably were attached to branches of trees. They probably were grooved, and you know, so that they could sort of bounce that hammerstone up and down because they were too heavy to hold otherwise. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to try to break this chunk off and make this one thin piece. And either I'm going to break it or I'm going to do okay. So I did take some of that off there. I also broke some other parts of it that I really didn't kind of want to do, but I got this thick part off here, and that's one thing that I wanted to do. And then as you look around it, well, let me put this back on here, and you can sort of see if, it's interesting when you start doing this, you want to look and see how rock breaks, and the idea is that you try to read the rock to get an idea of what it's going to become. But sometimes the rock will just tell you. So anyway, here's, you can pass that around, and you could make that part into a tool. By the way, you hit yourself a lot when you do this. And I do have a pad underneath, but I think I'm going to make it a little thicker.
That's your hand.
Any evidence that the Indians might have used copper?
I think there probably was, but, you know, they really worked a lot with copper, pounding it to make it into various shapes. And to me, it makes sense that they would have, you know, come across that, but I don't know that they've ever found any. Dan, do you know if they've ever found any toolkits that contain copper tools for making points?
Yeah, Alan Hansen has that, what we thought was a war club.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that could have been used. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. So. So again, this is called percussion flaking. And let's see.
Is that Knife River, did you say?
This is Knife River flint, yeah. This is stuff that we've actually gone out and collected.
When he's done, he'll be bleeding out of little points all over his hands. Used to it. They get embedded in his hands, and he's so inured to it that he just keeps on.
Right.
See, Dave, if you were around Dan and Russell long enough, you would know that before you start making the demonstration, you wouldn't tell us what you were planning on doing with it. So they would start doing something, and then when they get done, say, "This is what I meant to do."
Yeah, I'm going to throw this in Dan's woods when I'm done. He's going to be really excited to find it. Okay. But what's interesting was that how far this material was traded. Knife River flint is kind of found all over the United States. This type of stone, which is local, this actually comes from Black River Falls. This is called Hixton Quartzite. And the best point that I found, well, I really like it, is this one in the little brown frame. And you can pass that around if you want, if somebody wants to grab it. That's an Osceola point. That's about 5 to 8,000 years old. Okay. And that one, I found in the field, close to my house. And there's another frame of points that I found around too. So anyway, just thinning this out. So I got rid of that part that I didn't want on there. So then the next part is to thin this out. So I've got square edges here, and I want to have it so it comes down to a point. It's called a lenticular shape to it. And so, it would be working on that to do that. So what I'd probably do then is start using a smaller tool. I'm going to use this copper. And find the spot where it would come off good. Oh, the other thing I should show you with this is that most of the stone that you find is a flint type chert type stone, and that you can get it to spark. So if you've ever done, so
Burned down our museum.
but I wouldn't do that. So anyway, that's percussion flaking, and I don't know. How much time how long do you guys want to stick
Well,
around?
when they start, maybe.
Oh, okay, then I'm done.
And if you feel like some coffee or something, that's back there.
Okay. So sometimes you get these big chunks.
Excuse me, all we have is instant coffee and hot water. Too fancy to do anything else. But we do have a donation jar over there. If you'd like to donate and help us buy coffee.
So I didn't want to actually do that. But so what's happening is now I'm getting rid of that sharp, the square end, and you can see that it's becoming kind of sharp here. So, all right. Then this is a preform that I made. These are also preforms, and typically what people would do is instead of carrying these big rocks around to trade them, they would partially map out some other ones, and it was much easier to carry them in this preform shape than it was to carry the big rock. So they chip up a bunch of preforms and then they put them in their beef jerky thing, and then. But these are like some examples of preforms. And these could be easily made into other tools. Okay, this is a piece of an obsidian that I was working on. When I first started doing this, I didn't have access to flint, so I went to the hardware store and I got glass. And I first learned doing the thing that I'm going to show you next, which is called pressure flaking. Okay, so that's percussion. And I actually started working on this one. This was a piece of Hixton Quartzite that I thought I'd make into a point and maybe just donate to the museum along with another thing that I did. So this one it's not real great because you can see that it's got a big lump on the side, and when it gets to about this size, it's hard to get rid of these lumps because there's not enough mass left to the stone to really get those off there. So I'm going to show you how to put a Band-Aid on.
Why don't you
And-
wear gloves?
Well, I do sometimes, but you can't feel the stone as well.
On your left hand, why don't you wear a glove?
Well, this is the hand where,
Oh, you
you know, I really need to sort of feel what's going on. And so when you do a Band-Aid, you take off no, they probably had really callous, tough hands. Oh, the other thing I should say about this, you know, we think about this as being something that Native Americans did, but, you know, every culture had flint knappers, so if you go back far enough in your ancestry, you know, you've got flint knappers in your...
They've all got bloody hands.
They all have bloody hands, yeah. So my Polish background, flint knapping great ancestors did this all the time. So anyway,
40 years ago, right?
say that again.
30 or 40 years ago?
Yeah, right, yeah. Okay, so anyway, here I've got a point that's pretty close to being usable, except for that thing on the side there, which, you know, we'll just put it that side up because that side looks good. And what I'm going to do is called pressure flaking. And, no, actually I'm going to start pressure flaking on a different rock first. All right, here's a piece of micro flint that I've been working on for a while. It's not quite done.
Dave?
Yes.
I know you took a long time, but how did you learn the art? Were you
Oh.
watching somebody or did?
Yeah. Well, what happened, I think I'm going to do this. What happened was that I'm not going to tell you the full story, but I started finding points in this field, and interestingly enough, the field was, well, the first point I found was actually in the parking lot of a bar. And you can sort of imagine what people were thinking as here I am looking around in the parking lot of this bar. Said, well, did you lose your keys last night? Hey, buddy, you need some change? You know, whatever it was. And so this could turn into like a knife blade. And this is more of like a contemporary shaped knife blade. And so anyway, there was a field behind that, and I started looking at it in that field, and I started finding points. And I'm a teacher. I teach in Lindstrom. At the high school, I teach biology and environmental science. And I needed to take some classes, because actually I worked as a It's a long story, you know, it's convoluted. The more I tell it, then I have to back up more to this point. I used to work as a biologist. I had a teaching degree when I graduated. There weren't any jobs, so I found this job working as a biologist. I did that for 15 years. And then the place where I closed, there was a leverage buyout, and the place closed down. I went back to school. One of the classes that I took was at Stillwater. Was through UW River Falls, and they had this Native American conference. It was called Big Woods, Big Plains. And Big Woods, Big Plains, see? And anyway, when I was at this, I was listening to the speakers and stuff, and out in the hallway, there were some guys that were doing flint knapping. And, I kind of was talking to them and sort of told them, my thing about finding points. And I was so fascinated with how they were made that I just kind of kept coming back and back to them. And the guy said, well, if you're going to spend this much time doing this, you might as well learn how to do it. So anyway, that's what I did. And that's kind of how I got started. And the guys that taught me, actually, I think one of them died now. He was from North Dakota. He had like rheumatoid arthritis, just extreme, and it ended up, crippling him, so he couldn't do much of anything. He was a veterinarian, And the other guy, his name was Jim Regan, and some of you may have heard this name, just an excellent flint napper. He had a massive heart attack, and he died. And so anyway, I went back and they taught me how to do it, and every year I'd go back to this conference and they'd be flint napping, and I'd come and I'd sit down and I'd work with tools, and I bought some tools from Jim. And at Pine City, Minnesota, there's the Minnesota's Flint Nappers Guild meet there at the Northwest Trading Post in June, like I think toward the end of June every year. And they, flint nappers from all over the country come to that sometimes. And anyway, I just kept learning more and more about it, and Jim died, and this other guy died, and there was another guy named Dave that was doing flint napping there too. And he died, and now I'm doing the flint napping at Big Woods, Big Plains. So, but I'm nowhere near as good as these guys were. So, but I can sort of do this, and I can sort of make something that's usable, and I can make some points that are at least as good as some of the ones that I found.
How did they hold on to the really small points?
They may have taken like a stick or made a little vise with some pieces of wood. Okay. So anyway, this is percussion flaking. Now I'm going to do some pressure flaking. I told you that before, didn't I? Okay. So what I'm going to do, I still move it shaped as much as I want. And so what I'm doing is some rough shaping here. And they would have done this like with the scapula, the shoulder blade of the animal. And so you get this basic shape that you want.
When you start out, do you know what you're after, or does it sort of come to you?
Well, I have kind of an idea, but sometimes your idea gets changed because the rock breaks. And I've broken a lot of rock in my time of doing this, and you really literally have to do that in order to figure this out.
Now, you say a lot of your points are as good as, if not better than some that you found.
Yeah.
What would prevent you from seeding some ground with your points and claiming that they...
Yeah, and people have done that.
Yeah.
Actually, the site that I found, I've reported to the state, and it's on the State Historic Society's, Archaeology Society's site, and they've assigned me a number for this one particular site where I find lots of points. I guess it's really up to the person. If you're an ethical person,
Is there any way that you could look at the patina and say that
you
it's
can. Yeah.
brand new? Or...
Yeah, the average person probably wouldn't be able to. I mean, you could go into an antique store, and oftentimes you'll find points in an antique store. I went in one the other day, and they had these points that were out in this case, and these points were very crudely made. They were like unifacial, very few chips. And those points came from Mexico, and I know that that's where they came from. And people, unknowingly might buy them, for, I think they were selling like $10 or $12 a piece, but they were very cheap knockoffs. I mean, the stuff that I do is way better than the stuff that they were trying to sell as actual points. So anyway, pressure flaking, and literally what this is you're pushing flakes off. And what I'm doing here is I'm grinding down the edge of it, because I'm going to put pressure on the very tip, the very edge of this point and push down, and if it's too sharp, it's just going to crumble. So I'm going to take and grind this down. Okay. And I've got, what I'm looking for is a platform. And a platform is the place where you're going to take flakes off. If you look at this one, I don't know if you can see it, there's kind of a ridge that goes right down there. And it's kind of thick in this area, and I want to get rid of that. So this is an ideal platform. I'm going to put the, as a matter of fact, I got some handouts for you guys. If you're interested in this at all, take one and pass it around. And it kind of gives the basics of doing this. So if you ever wonder if when you pick something up in the field, if you actually have an artifact, you look at the edge of it and you see if it has a wavy kind of appearance. The wave is caused by flake taken off this way, flake taken off this way, flake taken off this way. So it'll literally kind of wave back and forth.
Dave or Dan, we talked about some of these being 6,000 or 10,000 years old. When was it that they quit making arrowheads and started using, or 100 years ago? 100
well, go ahead. Dave.
Yeah, when the Europeans came in, because the Europeans brought in trade goods, they brought in metal, they brought in metal points, and so it's like, the people that lived here were like anybody else. I mean, you do what's kind of convenient, and it was more convenient for them to just use what was brought in. So there really were a lot of trade goods that kind of ended this whole thing.
Except in this area, they made them out of copper, because copper has been found even here in places. Over by Trade Lake, there was an ancient pit that had been, evidently copper had been carried down by the glacier. But most of the UP copper up there has been found in float copper, it's called big pieces. And the Indians used that for eons before they quit using stone culture because it was easier and made better tools out of the copper. I have one copper point on it.
Right. So what I'm doing is I'm putting pressure on the edge of this. I'm pushing as hard as I can. And when I can't push any harder, then I kind of flick it in and it takes off like a flake. So this is kind of the last step in making a point, is that they would sharpen it using pressure flaking. And I'm not gonna sharpen this much, but what I'll do is I'll put notches in the side, and I'll show you how that's done. So.
So do you think in the Indian tribe that they were just specialists that did the stone tools? Or?
I think that initially they were. You look at the different styles of points, and the best explanation that I hear is that because there was such extensive trade, that there were styles that were in at the time. It's kind of like clothes. People wear certain things and then they go out of style and they don't. So the trade was extensive enough so that they would come around and say, okay, well, here's, I've got all these blanks for you, but let me show you the latest. And they did, and so when you look at that chart that Dan had up here, it's because, that information was being traded, and, the trade routes were extensive. I mean, I think we really underestimate the people that lived here before us.
When you find a cache of stone or points, does that suggest it was a social event to make these, or?
Well, yeah, back to your earlier question, I think the way that this worked was that in the summertime, groups of people would get together because during the winter they had to live in smaller groups because they were too much of an impact on the environment, that the environment couldn't support a large group of people. So they would spread out, and they would be less. It would be less of a demand on the environment, and they could survive. And in the summer, they would come together, and they would find a mate, or hang out with the relatives, or things that we do at like family reunions. So What was the question?
Is the evidence more that this type of work is a social event or
Well,
an
actually,
individual?
yeah, okay, so what happened, I think, was that there were some people that were really experts at this, and they did really amazing points, but when people spread out, it was kind of a utilitarian kind of thing, that they needed to make points because they needed knives and you know, spear points or whatever to survive. And some people weren't as good at it as others. So if you look at some of these points, you know, some of them are just excellent quality, and some of them are just, you know, good enough to use. And I think that's really what it was.
David, we're going to have to call it quits.
David can stay here and show you stuff, but we promised that people who complained one other time that at 8:30 we'd say, hey, the official meeting's over, you can socialize or stay and visit or whatever you like. So it's officially over, but you're certainly welcome to watch whatever you want to do.
The notch there, you're just pressure flaking?
Yeah, what I'm doing is I'm putting the notch for hafting.
Now, when you do that, you flatten that out a little bit so it doesn't cut the sinew, or?
Yeah, it's typically ground. Once you get it off, you kind of grind it in there with some kind of whatever.
So what do you have in your flint box? Is that like rope?
Yeah, someone told me once that twine worked really good
Twine.
for tinder.
So what are Boy Scouts, what do they use?
Oh, they use matches.
Matches, gasoline.
Yeah, gasoline.
No, but don't they do this in Boy Scouts?
Well, some